Okay, Chris Peaks back here with Brandon Mosley for our BCS State of Alabama podcast, and we've got, in my opinion, the best political analyst now in the state of Alabama, former Secretary of State John Merrill. So, John, going into this runoff, all the three elections I thought that were going to be razor thin ended up being blowouts. And the one I thought was going to be a blowout was razor thin. So, let's start with the Senate race. What happened there? I kind of thought Jared had some momentum going into that.
Well, Jared did have some momentum. And the thing to remember, too, Chris and Brandon, is that Jared's support was real. It was not imagined. You saw the signs, cards, you saw the side of the road, saw the post on social media. People were enthusiastic and energetic about him. I mean, the reason I think they were drawn to Brandon, he's an attractive candidate. He's well spoken. He has a good image. He has a great story. People looked at that and they said, "Hey, I want to be a part of that. That's somebody I can support. Somebody I want to support. Somebody I can be around." But I think his support was 6 miles wide and 1 inch deep. And whenever that happens, a lot of times, even though the support is authentic, it's not as real as committed support that you find through years of working in the field and having grassroots support like Congressman Barry Moore did and does. And Congressman Moore's support translated along with the president's endorsement into an outstanding level of support that he could take to the ballot box. And that resulted in him having a very wide margin of success over Jared Hudson and effectively becoming the United States Senator for Alabama after the coronation takes place on November the 3rd.
Secretary Merrill, Jared's support, I mean, he won 11 counties centered around Shelby and Jefferson and Blount, in the metro area, just all in that one big circle.
Sure.
Could he have made it a little bit closer if they had realized that and invested heavily into get out the vote efforts in their core area,
Brandon,
get their voters to the polls?
because there were so few races in those counties that resulted in people being enthusiastic about wanting to vote again. When you have a runoff like we just experienced, having the large number of statewide runoffs was unusual, first of all. Secondly, most of the county races had already been decided. And when that occurs, a lot of people that voted for you in the primary are not coming out to vote again in the runoff because they already voted in the race that was the most important race to them. I was talking to a probate judge in another county yesterday, and we were talking about the turnout in his race, and they had a local race that was decided by some 27 votes. And I asked him, what people had said about that particular race along with the statewide races. And he said some people were concerned about the undervotes. And, I told him, I said, look, some people didn't want to come back and vote in that particular race. They just voted for the U.S. Senate race, or they voted in the lieutenant governor's race, or they voted in the attorney general's race. And then when it got down there, they had election fatigue or voter fatigue, and then they did not cast their ballot in that particular race at the local level. So anytime you have a competitive sheriff's race, anytime you have a competitive county commission chairman's race, you're going to have people come out at the local level in larger numbers than you're going to have anywhere in your county, because those people know and understand that the people that are in those positions are actually people that they have to rely on to get things done. Get lights repaired, get potholes filled, get fencing put up, having appropriations for the Little League, all the things that are necessary to make your community be all it can be.
The Hudson campaign looked to me like they did a great job of marketing him early on. Jared with the rifle, Jared tough guy, send the warrior to Washington. Um, but they didn't advance that in the runoff. I mean, is there something they could have did different to make him look more senatorial?
Well, this is the thing that some people realized, and it was a nice line. It was a good line to use when it was introduced, but they had to debate, and Barry talked about his freedom score, liberty score, and he talked about how nobody had a higher score than he had in Washington, in the Senate or in the House. And I think that score was 21. And when Jared spoke, he said, I don't have a liberty score because I've not had to vote on issues in Washington, but I do have a score of 21-0 on the Taliban. Well, the audience went wild. I'm sure you were both there at the venue. But the thing is, we're not sending a U.S. Senator to Washington to kill the Taliban. We want them to be able to support our military servicemen and women who will be better prepared to fight against the Taliban and other individual enemies, whether they're foreign or domestic. But we don't send them up there to the Taliban. So you look at what actually got to occur. You want people that are capable of working with other members in their own caucus, which would be the Republicans, and in the Democratic caucus to work together to find out what is right and what's best for the greater good in Washington and for our nation overall. And so I don't think they could have changed the narrative because they'd already established what I'm a tough guy, I'm a military. I don't know a lot of DC. That's why you need me. But there are a lot of things that are very important in DC that need to be given consideration. Social Security, health care, mental health issues, all of those things, besides international politics and international and domestic terrorism, all of those things need to be given consideration. But you don't want somebody that's just a one-dimensional candidate.
Merrill, I was looking at the Republican results broken down by county. And, obviously Jefferson had the most votes, which one would, historically expect because it's the biggest county. But 2,000 votes less than Jefferson in the number two spot was Baldwin with 20,000 votes. Now they did have a state house runoff down there, which kind of helped. But is Baldwin becoming a much bigger, more potent force in statewide politics as their population has boomed?
Of course it is, and it's going to continue to do so. And you have people from other parts of the nation that are in the area. I think it's important to that because it's not just homegrown out. Also, people from Florida that have moved north. It's people from the northern part of our country that have moved south. They want to be down there on the beach or near the beach, and that matters to them. And so they're bringing their politics with them as well.
Remember, before I go into the next race, along the same lines, I want to say something. We had roughly around 400,000 people vote in this. Go back to the Baxley-Graddick race in '86. There was almost 900,000 people. Do people just not care anymore? And how do we get people back interested in going to vote? Because only about 5% of the people are deciding our elected officials in the state.
Well, you are correct, Chris, and I think it's important to remember that people need to be very informed when they're determining who they want to support and why. And when they're not informed, of course, low information voters are very dangerous too, as well as low voter turnout. But I do think it's important to remember that those people that vote, those people that participate are the ones that decide who our representatives are going to be at the local, at the state, and at the federal level. But as far as energy is concerned, enthusiasm is concerned, you talked about one of the most unbelievable races in the history of our state, 1986, the Baxley-Graddick runoff. But people are more inclined to be satisfied with the opportunity to vote in the general election than they have been recently in voting in primaries. And the president's impression and who he has selected to be his person in our statewide races, especially U.S. Senate races and in our congressional races, carries a lot of weight with our people throughout Alabama. It'll be interesting to see what happens when he's not in office anymore.
The last time a Republican Party chairman had political success, well, I guess that were translated immediately to getting elected was Jeff Sessions. And I think Twinkle Kavanaugh eventually got elected after a couple of, near misses. How unusual is it that for somebody who hasn't held an elected office before to translate that party chairmanship into, lieutenant governor, which John Wall did?
Brandon, you summed it up. It's very unusual in our state. It's not something that is common. It's not something that you can look to see happen again at any point in the near future. As a matter of fact, very few times, and there are some notable exceptions, and we can talk about those as well. Most recently with Senator Katie Britt, prior to her, Coach Tommy Tuberville. Prior to them, you look at Senator Sessions. Those people had never run for office before and were elected to United States Senate seats. And that is something, and Jeremiah Denton did the same thing in
now Sessions actually was elected Alabama AG.
Well, he was.
Yeah.
That was his first race was Attorney General in 1994, and then he won and was elected to the Senate seat he started running less than 6 months after he took office.
He was basically running for Senate as soon as he became AG.
That's exactly right. Of course, he probably knew that Senator Heflin was going to be stepping aside, but he was prepared and he was successful. But the reason I mention all of that is because in a high profile race like that, what we have typically discovered is that people who are elected to that position, the lieutenant governor's race in Alabama, are people who have worked their way up in the state at a local level, usually in the legislature or something similar to that, and then moving up to the lieutenant governor's race. But in this instance, I think what John Wall did, which was uncommon, not something looked at anything other than respect, is put together a team in all 67 counties that was made up of people who are local members of the local Republican Party. He activated those people. He had built-in confidence from those people from his time as the party vice chairman and then as the party chairman, and doing a tremendous job as party chairman, raising more money than any party chairman in the history of the state, getting higher profile speakers consistently, more so than anybody in the history of the state. It was remarkable to see John be able to do that. And then the coup d'etat, of course, was to get the endorsement of the president. And when that happened, a lot of people looked at that race and said, this is going to really change the race. And what we didn't realize that it was doing was it was actually ending the race. And that's what occurred.
On the lieutenant governor's race, I think you and Brandon and people who watch this know how hard I struggled with who I was going to choose, because me and Secretary Allen so close. But I wrote something a few days ago, kind of giving an autopsy of that race. From one, it seemed like they just made one mistake after another. I mean, have you seen a race that was, last year he was the prohibitive favorite. He had all the endorsements from the legislatures, from the mayors, trade associations. And then, have you seen a race mismanaged that bad before?
I don't recall ever seeing a race that I felt like was winnable, that by a tack mode, having a textbook example of what you need to do, going to all the places you can go to, securing as many endorsements as you can secure, and then putting it into place, raising the resources that were necessary to be effective in the media, and then to have it backfire the way that it did, where it was as if you were even a first-time candidate, was really not something that I was expecting to come out of that particular campaign. And I thought that John did a great job of promoting who he was, trying to be really positive in as much as he possibly could without having to respond to some of the attacks that the Allen campaign levied against him. But I think the result was indicated at the ballot box. I mean, it was a 14-point swing, which by any stretch in political science is viewed as a significant landslide victory for John Wall.
Do you think that West, his team, probably should have focused there at the end more on West rather than whether or not, Wall has a pet raccoon or, his snake or his butterflies or, did he have an apartment in Tennessee and all this other nonsensical, just negative attacks? I mean, a lot
And
of money was spent on that.
did was you just gave us the reasons why the West Allen campaign, one of the main reasons why the West Allen campaign was unsuccessful. They were never focused on an issue that they felt like they needed to hammer that was anything other than being negative toward John Wall. And I think one of the things that people should try to do whenever they're trying to be successful in their campaign at the city council level, local school board level, all the way up to governor, is you never have more than three things that you try to focus on. And one of the things that the Allen campaign did, they did not target their audience. They did not try to rifle approach the direct contact that they were trying to reach in order to make sure they got their message out to the people. You just told us 4 or 5 different things that they did that were not consistent on a message about John Wall. But in every instance that you just indicated, what they did consistently was to promote the name of John Wall. Now, former Governor Jim Folsom always said this: I don't care what they say about me, just as long as they spell my name right. And the thing about that was it kept his name at the forefront. And that's what Folsom was looking for. And that's what the Allen campaign actually did for John Wall, was they kept introducing his name time and time and time again. And then, as Chris has alluded to, we got to the point where it became almost comical to see the things that were being introduced on John Wall, and people began to lose confidence in thinking that the Allen campaign was actually sincere and serious in what they were trying to do. And I think that was another reason why he was defeated so significantly.
I don't know who was running John's campaign, but I mean, was it not ingenious? I mean, they're going after the guy because he hadn't got married yet, so they start showing his beautiful fiance in the ads. They make fun of his profession. Then he's got the snake, and then the raccoon ad. Then he's got the raccoon with the butterfly tattoo on it. And it was like, you're making this guy
John
more
Wall
likable.
campaign actually released the raccoon with the butterfly hat as a response to the negative Charlie attack.
Yeah.
I thought John and his team did a great job of responding to the attacks. In my opinion, the most effective commercial that was run during the 2026 cycle to date was the spot that John's pastor ran supporting him as an individual and talking about John's credentials, his integrity, and his character, and talking about why John would do or would not do certain things based on his personal relationship with Jesus Christ, who the pastor has witnessed because they are personal friends and he is his shepherd of the flock that John attends. I thought that was the most effective ad that I saw during the entire campaign from any candidate in 2026 to date.
In the Attorney General's race, Catherine Robertson I mean, jumped out there pretty quick with raising a bunch of money and getting a lot of profile. I mean, he was always, we kind of knew she was really powerful in the AG's race, those of us in the little Montgomery bubble, but I don't think most of the public knew who she was. But I mean, they spent a lot of money and they got it there really quick. And it seemed, even though there were a couple hiccups along the way, but it seemed like she was the front runner almost from start to finish.
Well, you're correct. And I tell you what, I think she did. She followed a textbook campaign that had been written by Katie Britt in 2022. And she did everything that Senator Britt did except have billboards. And with that, she made it clear that she was there for the long haul. I actually said something to her, Lord, it's probably been about 9 months ago at an event that we attended together in Talladega County. And I said something about the number of dollars that she was already spending on her campaign. And she said, "Oh, I'm not uncomfortable spending that. And there's more where that came from." She made that clear to me. And I knew then she was going to be a force to be reckoned with. She ran a great campaign. I thought she was very effective. I thought that Jay's campaign was one of the most lackluster campaigns that I've seen in a long time. They had a great candidate in a former Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and yet they did a poor job of establishing who he was. He was presented in some of the advertisements that they ran as being someone other than people know him to be. And when you don't define yourself properly and you allow others to take advantage of either you misrepresenting yourself or them defining you the way they want to, it puts you in a position that you sometimes cannot recover from, and he never did.
Me and Brandon had him on twice, and we just said, he never gave a reason to vote for him. Never, like you said, just sold himself. Let me ask this with Catherine Robertson. Early on, when she was campaigning, she mentioned Steve Marshall's name often. And then as General Marshall's campaign began to flounder in the Senate race, she dropped that. Had she stayed with that, would Jay have had a better chance, or was he already damaged?
No, I think what she was doing was trying to establish herself as a credible candidate by tying herself to a popular incumbent who had done, in many people's estimation, a good job as our Attorney General, being in the direct line to be governor of Alabama. And then when she reached a point where she knew she had done all she had to do to establish herself as an independent, credible candidate, she didn't need to mention General Marshall anymore. And she continued to have his support, and she continued to gain momentum from the support that she was getting from him and those that had supported him. And then when he was gone, because he did not make the runoff, she was able to parlay that into additional personal support that resulted in a very, very strong victory for her.
On a little bit more of a negative note, Alabama banned pack-to-pack transfers, and the sort of dark money in state. Catherine and Steve Marshall before her sort of did a workaround where if you donate to a PAC in another state, that doesn't have to report all of its contributions, they can then turn around and donate to, candidates here in Alabama, and somehow it's not an illegal pack-to-pack transfer. Do other campaigns in the future need to pay attention to that and maybe adopt that model if they can?
Well, I think what you've witnessed is a way that people feel like they can be more effective in utilizing the resources that they have better and stronger than they've been able to before, because of the way you just described that the Robertson campaign did very, very effectively. And I look at that, and she's been successful in her campaign so far. I think she'll continue to be successful as she takes it to the general election on November the 3rd. But I'll remind you, Brandon, you may remember this. Of Chris is so young, he may not, but I'll remind you that back in 2000, there was a candidate for the presidency that was actually defeated, but he was the first one to actually introduce the internet and introduce electronic giving and electronic campaigning. We had never seen that before in our nation's history. And that candidate was not Barack Obama, who utilized it more effectively than anybody had in the history of the republic, but that candidate was former United States Senator Bill Bradley from New Jersey, who introduced it against Albert Gore, who was the incumbent vice president. Now, Senator Bradley and Senator Gore, Vice President Gore, were the only two fighting for that Democratic nomination in 2000. And Senator Gore had such a constituency that he had built and so many people that owed him over a long period of time that Senator Bradley was not able to overcome that. But he's the one that introduced it, and Obama was the one that perfected it. So I think what you have introduced about the way that Catherine has raised resources and been able to utilize those resources successfully will be modeled after and mimicked by future campaigns, much the same way the internet campaigns have been since those candidates that Bill Bradley started in 2000.
Another question on the Attorney General's race. I thought the commercials that Jay ran in the primary were some of the stupidest ones that I've ever heard. The Ali Akbar, you back to the Middle East. I mean, did that damage him going in that made it unrecoverable?
Hurt him bad, Chris, and I heard people talk about it all over the state. I mean, in every county that I would visit, people were very disappointed in his choice to run that campaign, and that became a reflection on him, and they were disappointed in him because that was not who people knew Jay Mitchell to be, and yet he was trying to become a candidate that he thought would appeal to the broader masses, and it ended up backfiring on him, and I think it resulted in a deficit he was not able to overcome.
In the Commissioner of Agriculture race, we had Jack Williams, who was a pretty well-known and respected figure who's been running for this position for, I mean, all the way back to before the 2022 election.
At least 6 years.
Yeah. And I mean, and you had Christina Werner McInnes, who's very, certainly her family's, both sides of her family are very well known, especially in the Baldwin County area. And Alpha got behind Corey Hill, who was a small town mayor and chicken farmer up in North Alabama that I don't think any of us had ever heard of. And they took that all the way to the finish line. How much is that a success on, Corey Hill obviously has most of the credit, but certainly Alpha demonstrated their muscles in ways I don't think any of us expected there.
Well, you are correct. I think that's important to note. I will say this. I think it's important to also note that Alpha utilized their resources in the runoff to make sure they held that position. It was clear that position was the most important position to them when they got ready to understand how they were going to utilize the resources they had available to them to secure that position. And Corey did a great job of getting out and moving to all the counties around the state, promoting his candidacy. You know how the Farmers Federation endorsement works. Chris knows how it works. Some of your viewers and listeners may not know, but it's not like the people in Montgomery on South Boulevard decide that. What they do is they encourage a statewide candidate to go to all 67 counties to visit with all their county chapters. And then at the appropriate time, all of those county chapter presidents and or representatives come to South Boulevard. They hear from the candidates themselves in person, and then they vote to see who they're going to give their nomination to. And that's how you secure the nomination for the Federation. And then they get behind you and they support you with money. They support you with individual assistance. They support you with social media. They support you with direct mail. All the things that will help a campaign be more effective as they move forward in trying to secure the position they're seeking.
A lot of people don't understand how important the ag commissioner's job is. I mean, they've got so many things they're responsible for. I mean, just really right below the governor. But it seems to be like an issueless race. They're not attacking each other. If you don't get that farmer's endorsement, is there any way to overcome that?
Of course there is. I mean, there's been several examples of people who have sought the ag commissioner's position and did not receive the Farmers Federation endorsement and then won the position. John McMillan did that. There was a couple before him. I remember Dorman Grace actually received the Farmers Federation endorsement and he lost. I know Horace Horn secured the Farmer Federation endorsement. He lost the nomination. So there's been very, very high number of times where they have not been successful. They lost several races this time in the legislature and some statewide races that we've already mentioned. They nominated Steve Marshall to be their candidate for the United States Senate, and he didn't even make the runoff. So I think it's important that people know that the Federation endorsement is very important, but just because you get it does not mean that you're going to win.
In that PSC Commission 2 race, Jim Ziegler had a commanding lead in the primary. He had like 45%
Right.
and almost won it outright.
Right.
But then a massive amount of money came in behind the incumbent Chris Beaker the third in the runoff. That almost overcame Ziegler. I don't want to tell the money people in Montgomery what to do, but could they have picked a better candidate to begin with?
Jim has been running for public office since 1974. He served as president of student body at the University of Alabama in 1970, and then he went to law school. He finished his law degree, and then in 1974, which was the first statewide gubernatorial cycle that came along after he had finished his undergraduate and law work, he ran for office and was elected to the Public Service Commission. Actually, the Beaker campaign used a very nice picture of Ziegler in that campaign, talking about when he first started, when he was 26 years old, 25 years old, until today. They showed him looking like he looks at 78, 80 years old. But the thing that you need to know about Jim's record as a candidate is that Jim has never had a race that wasn't close. I mean, the largest margin of victory that Jim ever had that he secured the nomination was when he beat Dale Peterson back in 2014. And
there are some reasons Dale Peterson,
that's
not
right.
going to go there.
That's right. So the thing to remember is Jim's always had close races. And I remember Jim running for Secretary of State back in 2022. And Jim, I think he got like 40, somewhere between 40 and 43, 44% of the vote in the primary. And then I don't think he got more than that in the runoff. But what happened with Jim, he just didn't raise enough money to get the word out. And this race required less money. And a lot of people looked at it as a referendum on the power company instead of looking at it as a referendum on the two candidates that were in question. They tied Beaker and the Beaker campaign with the power company and other utilities, as opposed to Ziegler being tied to being the watchman that will protect you and let you know when issues are important for you to be knowledgeable about. And then he will protect you as a public service commissioner because he will be your watchman.
Yeah, I think what was he used to be called like Mr. 49% or something. And you answered my one next question I was going to ask, was this an anti-power company vote? I want to go back to something else though. In the Senate race. I know this didn't happen in the runoff, but what happened to Steve Marshall's campaign? I mean, is the Trump endorsement now just that strong? Because he had like a double-digit lead early on.
I'm not getting
Y'all still
audio
there?
from John. Yeah, I can hear you, Christopher, but I'm not hearing John. We lost John. We might just call that quits.
Okay, well, we had 45 minutes with him. I'll see if he pops back on, but he may have lost because his Wi-Fi was kind of breaking up anyway.
Yeah.
We'll just, we'll see her for just a few minutes, see if he comes back. So I don't want to end. Um, while we're doing this, did you see the was it 2 days ago when it was 70, 79 degrees? Do you remember it being this cool in June before?
Yes.
Okay.
July and August are the two, scorching months.
You froze.
Yeah, we can see you for a little while, but we couldn't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, what I was asking was I want to go back to asking on the Senate race. I mean, what happened with General Marshall's campaign? Does hold up, I had
Yeah,
the I had a phone call come in.
Chris, General Marshall's campaign never really seemed to catch fire. I know he was hoping that he might receive the president's endorsement. I know that he had worked hard as our attorney general to try to protect the president and the president's position, but he was not able to raise the kind of resources that were necessary to put him in a competitive position. And then he didn't get the president's endorsement. And I remember doing the live coverage on the television station in Birmingham on primary day, May the 19th. And when we went off the 10:30, of course, they're still scrolling the votes, but the news director came up to me and he said, well, it looks like it's going to be Barry Moore and Steve Marshall in the runoff. And I said, let me see something. So I went over and I looked at some returns, and they did not have complete returns in from a certain part of Jefferson County. They did not have complete returns in from Blount County at all.
Yeah.
No returns from Blount. They had no returns from St. Clair, and they had returns from most of the county down in Shelby. But those were the four counties that I looked at. Steve Marshall was up off the air by like 5,000 votes. And I said, Jared Hudson's going to make this runoff by at least 5, maybe 6,000 votes. So there was an 11,000 vote swing that occurred. And that's exactly what happened when those numbers came in from those counties. Then he took second place.
Yeah, when I seen that, I was looking at that too. And that's exactly what I thought. I'm sorry, Brandon. Go ahead.
John, a lot's been made about, how we had higher than normal Democrat turnout in the May 19th primary and what this portends for the general election. Maybe I'm missing it, but unless something just really.
They had higher turnout because they had better quality candidates, and they had candidates that were competitive in a nomination process and trying to secure the nomination for November the 3rd. And that resulted in a higher level of participation for the Democratic Party than we've seen in recent times. Some people are trying to say, oh, it's the beginning of a blue wave. We see the blue wave coming. Well, if they're seeing a blue wave, it's because they're down at Fort Morgan or they're at Orange Beach. It's not because something is going to be changing that's going to result in those candidates being elected statewide. Going into this particular cycle, any unnamed Republican on the ballot is at statewide level is going in at approximately 60% of the vote. Any unnamed Democrat was going in at approximately 40% of the vote. And I will tell y'all something that I think you will appreciate, and I hope you'll understand with the tenor that I introduce it. But Walt Maddox is a good friend of mine. We get together frequently. We've been friends ever since he came back from playing football at UAB and started work with the Tuscaloosa representative for the Alabama Education Association before he ever went to work for the Tuscaloosa City Schools, and then got elected to the city council and then became Tuscaloosa's mayor. But one day we were having breakfast, and I was talking to him about his campaign. This had been probably a year after the election was over. And I said, Mayor, tell me your thought process about what you'd experienced, because it's going to be hard for the Democratic Party to ever have a candidate that was any stronger than you, because not only had he done a good job in Tuscaloosa, but he had led Tuscaloosa on the road to recovery after the tornadoes from April 27th, 2011. And he said, John, let me tell you what I learned. He said, Will Boyd, who at the time was running for the United States Senate against Senator Katie Britt, was actually no. This was in 2008.
This is 2018.
18.
Yeah,
Well,
lieutenant governor.
was he running for lieutenant
Yeah,
governor?
he was running for lieutenant governor.
For lieutenant governor. He ran against Senator Britt 4 years later in 22.
Yeah,
but
he's run for lots of things.
Yeah, so I think this may have been his first time that he ran statewide, but he got 40% of the vote, and he spent $50,000 on his campaign, $50,000 statewide, and Walt got 43% of the vote, and Walt got and spent $5 million, and so he told me, I got 3% of the vote, and it cost me $5 million. Because his point was, if he hadn't done anything, he still would have got at least 40% of the vote, because that's what Will got. And he was right. He was right. So that's where we are. And until something changes that shows me something different, that's where we're going to be.
Along the same lines, John, I got one more question for you. Probably the most respected candidate on the ballot on either side that everybody likes and nobody has anything bad to say about is former Commissioner Ron Sparks. Is his ceiling the same, 40%, or is it possible some people may go down there and vote for him and still vote for all the Republicans?
I think you're right. I think Ron Sparks is well respected. I think Ron Sparks did a good job as our Commissioner of Agriculture and Industry. I think he was viewed as an individual who had character and integrity as he served in that capacity. But that did not translate against Governor Bentley in 2014 when he ran, and 2010 when he ran against Artur Davis, secured the nomination. It did not translate at that point to him winning. I don't see it. I see his ceiling today as maybe 45% max.
Mr. Merrill, we've had you on for over 45 minutes. That was what we agreed to do. Thanks so much. Is there anything you'd like to add before you go?
No, but I'm always excited to hear from y'all, and I'm very appreciative of you giving me time to share with you. And I'm so excited to be able to visit with both of y'all again. Please feel free to call me in the future.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it a lot, man.
I'll take care.
Thanks for being on.
Bye.